Hey guys, maybe I'm rambling here. The Jerusalem crisis. Pleas for calm as violence escalates. Countries worldwide have appealed for calm after days of unrest spiraled into retaliatory attacks by Israel and the Palestinians. The US, the European Union, and the UK have urged Israel and Palestinians to lower tensions as soon as possible. The violence escalated on Monday as the Palestinian militias fired rockets toward Jerusalem. In response, the Israeli military launched airstrikes against militant targets in the Gaza Strip. Palestinian health officials in Gaza said 22 people, including children, had died in the strikes. Israel's military said at least 15 members of the Hamas group that rules Gaza was among those killed. Hamas has threatened to strike after hundreds of Palestinians were injured in clashes with Israeli police at Holy Site in Jerusalem on Monday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hamas has crossed a red line and that Israel will respond with great force. The past few days have seen the worst of violence in Jerusalem for years. Increasingly violent confrontations between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters at a compound at Jerusalem's Old City has threatened to trigger a wider conflict. Palestinians have been angered by restrictions on access to the compound where the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, is housed, along with the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism. Early on Tuesday, the Palestinian Red Crescent, a humanitarian group, said no more than 700 Palestinians have been injured in clashes with Israeli security forces in Jerusalem and across the West Bank. The fundamental reason for the renewed violence does not change. It is the open wound of the unresolved conflict between Jews and Arabs that has blighted and ended Palestinian and Israeli lives for generations. This latest episode has happened because of tension in Jerusalem, the sharpest part of the conflict. The holy sites in the Old City are national as well as religious symbols. Crises affecting them have often ignited violence. The triggers for what has happened this time include heavy-handed Israeli policing on Palestinians during Ramadan and controversial efforts in the Israeli courts to evict Palestinians from their homes. But other events can have the same effect. This was a crisis waiting to happen, and a conflict that once again has been left to fester. Leaders on both sides have concentrated on safeguarding their positions. The biggest challenge of making peace has not been addressed seriously for years. But bombardments did not abate overnight as the sound of Palestinian rockets and Israeli airstrikes echoed across the region on Tuesday morning. Israel's military said it carried out strikes on 130 targets across the Gaza Strip. In one strike, a woman was killed and two others were injured, health officials said. Meanwhile, Hamas fired a rocket barrage at the city of Ashkelon in southern Israel. It said this was a retaliation for Israeli attack on a civilian apartment block near Gaza City. A Hamas source told the BBC more than 300 rockets had been fired from Gaza in the last 12 hours. What's the global reaction? The U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said Hamas must end the rocket attacks immediately, adding, all sides need to de-escalate. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki echoed these calls, saying U.S. President Joe Biden was seriously concerned about the violence. In a tweet, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the rocket attacks must stop, calling for an end to the targeting of civilian populations. The EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, said the significant upsurge in violence in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem needs to stop immediately. The firing of rockets from Gaza against civilian populations in Israel is totally unacceptable and feeds escalatory dynamics, the spokesman said. The UN Secretary Council held an urgent meeting on Monday over the violence. No statement has been issued, but speaking to the Associated Press, a diplomatic official said the UN, Egypt, and Qatar, which often mediate between Israel and Hamas, were all trying to halt the fighting. Why is Jerusalem a flashpoint? The city with the sickest sights is the most sensitive place in all the decades-old conflict between Israel and Palestinians. Alongside its religious importance on national claims, Israel in effect annexed East Jerusalem and considers the entire city its capital, though this is not recognized by most other countries. Palestinians claim eastern half as the capital, if you hope for a state of their own. The hilltop compound contained the Al-Aqsa Mosque and buttressed by the Jewish Holy See, the Western Wall is especially sensitive, with both Israel and Palestinians worried of each other's intentions and activities there. Israel says the current violence there was planned well in advance by Palestinian extremists through a series of events has driven unrest in Jerusalem, as you can see here in this map. On Monday, a planned march by Israeli nationalists, which was due to pass through Muslim areas of East Jerusalem's Old City, was called off for fears it could stoke unrest. The Jerusalem Day event marks Israel's capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. It is regarded by many Palestinians as a deliberate provocation. This year's march can also take place in the final days of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. Now, I'm curious to know what you think. So, let me know in the comments section if you will. This is Maybe I'm Rambling.